So let's talk about the process of actually creating a histogram or a frequency histogram. Steps involved if you're not really given the details to help you figure that out. So the first thing that we need to do is actually figure out and determine how many values there are in our data set. So if we count all of these data values, we always use n to represent that number. And in this data set, there are 53 values. So a general guideline to help us decide how many bins or bars we want, they are usually referred to as bins, is if we take the square root of n to get a general idea of how many classes or bars or bins we should have. So if we take the square root of 53, we find that that's about, it's 7 point something, some number. So we can round this. Doesn't have to be real precise. So we know we want to use 7 or 8 classes approximately in order to get a good look for our graph. So the next thing we need to do is actually figure out what's the range of values. In other words, what's the lowest value, what's the highest value? What's the span of numbers that we're going to need to have along our number line here? And our lowest value is 100. And the highest value in this list is 260. So when we subtract, we get that we're looking at a span or a range of values of 160. So we need to be able to break this number line up into equal amounts. And so we need to divide whatever this span or range is by this particular number to figure out what the width of each interval should be. So like I said, this number, we can adjust a little bit. It doesn't have to be precise. And what I'm noticing is that this 160, if we divide by 8, then we're going to get a nice, pretty even 20. So what that's helping us decide is what these values should be along our number line. Right? So what that's telling us, since our lowest value is 100, we want to start here with 100. And we want each of our intervals to be 20. So we have another little bit of a dilemma, another little thought process to use. So we're going to think of this as intervals. So we're going to think of this as 100 to 120. And then 120 up to 140 and so on. But we can't have the repeat of this particular number. So we have to decide and we have to be consistent. Do we want the interval to include this lowest number of 100 and then go up to but not include 120? Or should we include the 120 in this particular interval and not include the 100 as part of the interval and have a lower interval? My lowest value is 100, so I know I want to include 100, so I'm going to include 100. But what that really means is that I'm going to adjust on this other end. So really I'm going to go from 100 up to 119. And then I'm going to start here and include 120 in this next interval. And I'm going to go up to 139. And then 140 I want to include. And I'm going to go up to 159. And then 160 up to 179. And 180 up to 199. And 200 up to 219. And 220 up to 239 and 240 up to 259, and then I'm going to have an interval from 260 up to 279. So in that process, I want you to realize we thought we were going to get 8 classes, but I want you to notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We're going to end up with 9 actually, and that's okay, because remember that is just a rough estimate of how many classes or bins we should have. So the way we label our graph, I'm going to go ahead and do that first. The way we label our graph is that we are going to show our weight along this graph, along this axis. And on a histogram, the frequency or the count is always what we show along our y-axis. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I know how far we're going to be going up, so I'm going to go ahead and label that. So we're going to have our intervals here go from 100. We're going to have 120 here, 140, 160, 180, 200, 220, 240, 260, and actually we're going to need to draw a little interval marker for 280 also. So I want you to notice I'm not writing in the 100 to 119. I'm only showing these particular marks on my graph, the 100, 120, 140, 160, and so on. All right, so the process from here is that we have to actually truly just tally up how many values there are in each particular interval. So we need to go number by number. The first number is 192. That number would be in this first interval. 152 would be in this interval. 135 would be in this interval. 110 is here. 128 is here. 180 is here. See, that's why it's important that we determine which location that value of 180 should be. Here's 260, that was our biggest value, 170, 165, and 150. I'm going to pause and actually fill in the rest of this data so you don't have to watch through that process. Yes, you have to go through all 53 numbers. All right, so if you see, I've gone through the entire list and added all of the tallies. And so now we actually can go through the process of actually graphing our graph. And I apologize, I want to go back and I want to add in a couple numbers here just to make it a little easier to see how far up I need to draw my bars. Remember, these in a histogram, the bars are going to touch because these intervals touch. And we'll talk about that again in just a second. So from 100 to 119, really, up to 120, there are 7 values. Between 120 and 140, there are 12 values. Between 140 and 160, there are 7 again. And between 160 and 180, there are 9. And then we have another 12. And then we have a 4, a 1. And then there is actually, notice, excuse me, there's a gap here where we're not even going to show anything in that particular interval. And then we have a 1 for that particular location. So a few things about the histogram I want you to notice. Remember, we would want to talk about or think about the shape, where the center is, whether there are any outliers. And we can answer some questions about what would be going on, what this graph shows as well. Where the most values are, what the most common weights are, and what the highest weights are, things like that. All right, I hope this helps with just understanding the process of actually just creating.
Sorry, that's our crazy dog.
That would be my crazy dog in the background. Sorry about that.